Hey, it's time for our lunch and learn. It is Wednesday, April 29th. Wednesday, April 29. Jump on and join
I
us.
look really small.
You look really small. You need to scoot up.
I can't.
Or I need to scoot
Desk
back.
is right here. One of the two.
Hey, we're coming at you live, Daniel and Daryl. We need to come up with a cool name for the show. The Daniel and Daryl show.
That's not cool at all.
What should we call it? If we did a daily live stream.
Put it in the comments.
Yeah, put it in the comments.
Cool name for the duo.
The dynamic duo? That would be original. Nobody's ever thought of that
Nobody's
before.
ever.
Good afternoon. Who's on here? Shoot us a text.
I see two of you. You can't hide. Three
Oh,
of you.
3. We just tripled in popularity.
From 2 to 3.
Well, from 0 to 3.
That's how math works.
Gwen Larson, happy Wednesday. Hi, Miss Rhonda. Who's that other lurker in the shadows?
We will find out who you are.
Yeah, we will find out. We will hunt you down and expose you.
And that's a bit extreme, but
Yeah, John Forge.
I saw him earlier today. I drove by his house and waved at him, and he looked at me like I didn't know who I was.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if he saw me or not, but
John lives downtown. Maybe he just didn't want to acknowledge that he knew you.
it's true. And there's JC.
Hi,
You got 4
JC. Whoa. All right. We're going to give you all just a minute or two, a couple minutes to hop on, get yourselves settled. What does she say? No
exposing, please.
exposing, please. Exposing what?
And he waved at me. Okay, good. Thank you, John.
Oh,
I drove past, and before you saw me, I thought I was already past. I didn't see you wave. But there.
hey, we thought we'd do something a little different. And, if it goes over well today, we'll probably trademark it and just do it every day from now on. Not really. But we wanted to just kind of jump on and have I don't know if you guys ever get to experience this or not where you work, but Daniel and I, or if you've ever been down here and seen, Daniel and I share an office. And it's a really big office. So the days that Daniel's here, we work in the same office together, which is good and bad because, that way we don't have to like holler down the hallway at each other. You don't have to get up and walk down the hallway we used to be like at opposite ends of the hallway. And that really became a pain. And we don't have an intercom system, and, walkie-talkies just seem so like excessive.
Yeah.
Right? So it really is helpful when we need to have discussions or ask a simple question to just kind of like look over or turn around. It's not helpful though when you're trying to get something done and the other one wants to talk. It's always
We all know which one likes to talk.
Yeah.
We all know.
But it is helpful when it's a subject that actually I would say probably, Daniel, if you claim that I have discipled you over the years, how much discipleship do you think has happened like right here in this office, just sitting at opposite desks?
I mean, do you want a number value or like how many hours?
Give me a
or
percentage.
days?
If of 100% of the time that I've discipled you, or yeah, if of the 100% of time that I've spent discipling you, what percentage of that has happened here in the office? Informally.
I mean, almost all of it, honestly. I mean, most of it has. I mean, this is really where we spend most of our time together.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
for sure, most of it.
And we end up having some really good discussions, things that shape and form ministry around here. And so today we are going to be talking about idolatry. and the need, our need for having idols as part of our worship. Does that seem odd to you? Does it seem odd to anybody else that we need an idol to worship? Give me a yes or a no. So Daniel, what you were the one that kind of brought the topic up. What were you thinking?
Right. Well, I was thinking about like what I was going to talk about for like my lunch and learn this week, and I'm the worship pastor, so I kind of thought I should talk about worship, and so in thinking about that, I was kind of thinking about what is the number one killer of true worship, and the first thing that popped in my head was idolatry. So it just got me kind of studying and got me thinking about it. And I came across a quote from John Calvin, and that got me more interested. So I started looking into that quote and got more context of it, and that's kind of what brought us to where we are now. And just kind of reading this paragraph where he speaks a little bit about idolatry. So
give us the quote.
So the first thing that I came across was, now somebody had kind of changed the wording around to make a little bit more sense, because when you're reading John Calvin stuff, it's a little I have to Google a lot of words to figure out what they mean. But he says the human mind is, so to speak, a perpetual forge of idols. Now, how they had put it, the person I was reading their article had basically said the human heart is an idolatry, is an idol factory. The human heart is an idol factory. So that got me thinking about that and what that means. And then I came across this other article that put that into context. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to read this last half of this paragraph and try to say the words. I'm going to try to read it, and there's a lot of words that I don't use. And I had to read it several times just to like comprehend half of it. So if I'm reading through this and it's really confusing, don't feel bad at all. But he says, the human mind, stuffed as it is with presumptuous rashness, dares to imagine a God suited to his own capacity, as it labors under dullness, nay, it is sunk in the grossest ignorance. It substitutes vanity and an empty phantom in the place of God. To these evils another is added. To God, whom man has thus conceived inwardly, he attempts to embody outwardly. The mind in this way conceives the idol, and the hand gives it birth. And then this part was something that really stood out to me as well. It says that idolatry has its origin in the idea which men have that God is not present with them unless his presence is carnally exhibited. It appears from the example of the Israelites. They say, said they, make us gods which shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man that has brought us up out of the land of Egypt, he wet not. I don't know what this means. He wet not what is become of him. And then it goes on, they knew indeed that there was a God whose mighty power they had experienced in so many miracles, but they had no confidence of his being near to them. If they did not with their eyes behold a corporeal symbol, that's another word I don't know, a corporeal symbol of his presence, there we go, as an attestation to his actual government. And then it goes on to some other stuff, but that's kind of the meat of what we were going to discuss. Hold on, I gotta Google again.
Corporeal?
Yeah.
Fleshly.
Ooh.
Or bodily. I'm not that smart. I Googled it before Daniel did.
Cheater. I don't believe you. I'm going to Google it anyway.
It's right on the screen, right there.
Oh, well, see there.
Relating to a person's body, especially as opposed to their spirit. They're corporeal, so bodily or fleshly. So sum that up. What's Calvin? Which, by the way, it's beautiful writing. It really is, but
Yeah.
It's not 21st century American.
Yeah. It stretches your
English.
vocabulary
Yeah.
a little bit. But basically, starting with the human mind is, so to speak, a perpetual forge of idols. And then he goes on to speak about the presence of God. And really how it sums it up to me is that our perception of God's absence in our life, the results of that, our first response is idolatry. When we feel or assume that God is not present, we go to building idols immediately. Some of those idols we feel like are good because we build idols that represent God, so that we feel like God is present, but they're not actually. We begin to worship certain images and ideas of who God is instead of God Himself.
Yeah, I love the quote, and I love the language of the quote. But let me break it down as this first part that Daniel read, as he's got it highlighted. The human mind, stuffed as it is with presumptuous rashness, which means our mind is presumptuous and it's impatient, dares to imagine a God suited to its own capacity. In other words, we limit God to the way we can imagine Him.
Okay.
As it labors under dullness, nay, is sunk in the grossest ignorance. It substitutes vanity and an empty phantom in the place of God. So it substitutes, so the dullness of the human mind, it's sunk to the grossest ignorance. It substitutes vanity. Again, what we imagine is acceptable, what we imagine God should look like or should act like or behave like, substitutes vanity and an empty phantom in the place of God. To these evils another is added. The God whom man has thus conceived inwardly, he attempts to embody outwardly. The mind in this way conceives the idol, and the hand gives it birth. So, in other words, God is like enormous. I can't get both hands in there. There we go. God's enormous. He's bigger than that. But our mind we can't wrap our minds around God in His fullness. We can't wrap our minds around God in His fullest extent. We can't even wrap our minds around the God that the Bible tells us about. What the Bible tells us about God, and it only begins to tell us about God. Our mind can't wrap we can't wrap our minds around that. So instead, since we can't wrap our minds around it, we begin to shape God into what we can wrap our minds around, which has a whole lot to do with the book. What's the book we've been reading?
Not God enough.
Not God enough. We've created this image of a God that's not God enough. He's enough God, but He's not God enough. Because we minimize Him because we can't wrap our minds around Him. And so we have this empty phantom in the place of God. And then we add to that, we need a God that's present. And so we begin to fashion idols. We begin to fashion things that we can worship. The mind in this way conceives the idol, and the hand gives it birth. So we think about what God looks like. We think about God's extent. We think about, and I'm not talking about like God's face necessarily, but we form this image what God should do, be, behave like, and then our hands begin to need an image that we can actually see.
So when it comes to looping this back around to worship, now when I'm talking to worship today, I'm talking about our corporate worship, and you know that's kind of that's a lot of my focus when I talk about worship. Is talking about the songs we do, the worship services we prepare, things like that, because that's just kind of where a lot of my time goes into. We all know that, and I think we often go to this other side because we don't want to box worship in, and we say a lot that worship is anything that glorifies God. It's not just music, but then we don't often talk about the actual music and worship and corporate worship very often because we don't want to box it into just that, but. So really, if you've ever had that experience where you come to church and you sing the songs and you don't have any kind of experience, you don't have any kind of connection, it's just like you don't feel like God is present in that time. It's because we've created an idol of who we believe God is, and that God is not big enough to worship.
So what are some ways? What does that idol look like in a lot of ways?
Well, I think when you talk about coming to a worship service, it can really, I think those idols they can turn into what we talk about a lot is you come to a worship service out of obligation because you feel like if you're going to be a good follower of Jesus, you have to come to church. So you turn church into an idol. When you talk about service, it's really easy, and I've been there before, where you work really hard, you serve a lot, you do a lot of things for the church. So you make an idol out of the church, thinking that equating that to worshiping God. So really, you're not doing that service out of worship to God the Creator. You're doing that because you love your church and you want to serve your church, and so you made an idol of the church and equated it. The church equals God. So instead, you make service to the church your idol instead of serving for the glory of God to be your focus.
Yeah, that's good. We a lot of those idols that we create, because more than likely you're not watching this live stream unless because we're only putting it on band right now. More than likely, if you're part of our Crossroads Church band, you don't have any doubt that God exists, right? I mean, there's probably no doubt in your mind that God exists. You've seen evidence of how God has worked in other situations, how God has worked in your life. You've seen some evidence of transformation in your own life, or you've seen evidence of transformation in someone else's life, or you've seen prayers answered, or you've seen blessings bestowed that are a result of a higher being, the one that we call God Almighty. But a lot of times we define God as those things. We define God as an answered prayer, or we define God as a blessing that's come our way, or we define God as how many times have you sat in a worship service and you became very emotionally involved in the service? Maybe you were brought to tears, or maybe you just got this feeling of joy and happiness through music, or you felt conviction or something along those lines. And so what this quote from Calvin is saying is that a lot of times we limit God to that expression. We feel good about
God is not defined by your experiences.
Yeah.
Like you can't define God by the experiences that you've had or are having. Because it's like, and we say this a lot. I say this a lot. I've said this a lot in the past, but I kind of rethink the way I use words. And it's not to discourage people in saying this, but it's like you talk about a car accident, and there's two cars involved. One family or one person walks away unharmed at all, not a scratch on him, and the other person not so much. And you say, wow, this person walked away, God is so good. But what if that person didn't walk away? Does that change God's goodness? Does that experience define who God is? God is not good because your life is good, and God is not bad because your life experience is bad. God is God, no matter what.
Yeah, that's good. Have you ever been to a church service and you walked away and go, I didn't feel God's presence. And how did you decide that? How did you discern that God wasn't present? Is it because you weren't moved to tears? Is it because you didn't feel conviction? Is it because the music didn't create this emotional experience for you? Have you ever served and you felt like, I just don't know if I don't know if this is what God wants me to do anymore? Why? What made you discern that whatever service it was that you were doing, whether it was teaching a class, whether it was working in the nursery, whether it was, feeding homeless, what made you discern that God was in that in order to discern that God was not? Was it because when you felt like God was in it, you were being appreciated? You were being told, wow, you did a really great job. And so when that didn't happen, God's no longer in it? Or maybe it's because you felt good doing it, and now when you're performing that duty or that service, you don't feel good about it anymore. What are some other examples of that?
I mean, in the church?
Yeah, in the church, in worship. Because, again, they're all, as you stated in the beginning, they're all forms of worship. Whether we're serving, whether we're reading the Word of God, whether we're praying, whether we're singing.
I'm just kind of stuck, when you're talking about that, I'm stuck on thinking about the disciples and what made them decide, whether they're being called here or there. And, when Jesus was arrested, you had one of them that was willing to fight to the death with a sword to defend him. And then as soon as Jesus is dead, they're all freaking out. Like, Jesus is no longer with them. He's not in their presence, and they all freak out and, scatter.
Yeah.
It goes back to the presence of God. They were all about Jesus being there as a visual representation. And when Jesus was gone, their whole life just didn't make sense.
Yeah.
God didn't change in that moment. It was just their perception.
Yeah.
And
even though he had spent most of the 3.5 years that they were together telling them, there's going to come a day I'm not going to be here.
I'm going to die,
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah. I'm not always going to be here, but I'm going to send a comforter. And yet when he was gone, they went nuts.
Yeah, I think it's easy to begin to find idols when it comes to when it comes to church. I think you can begin to see them in. So I'll use the worship team as an example. When I first started leading worship, it was new, it was exciting, it was fun. People were saying, "You're doing a really good job. I didn't know you could sing. I didn't know you could play." And it was it's really uplifting and positive. And then I've been doing. How long have I been leading worship?
8, 9.
8-9 years. It's been a while. And there are some weeks, and I've had seasons in my life where I just feel like this is just work. It's not fun anymore. It's a lot of work.
Especially now when there's not 150 people to pat you on the back and tell you what a great job you're doing.
And you begin to realize that you were doing what you were doing for you'd made an idol out of it, because you said, I'm doing this for God, but what really makes it worth doing is the positivity people bring to you and the good feeling that you get from doing this, and it's fun. And then when it's not fun anymore, you're just like, this is work. But it doesn't mean you're not called to it. It doesn't mean that it's not what you're supposed to be doing. So I think whenever you get to the point where you start feeling like, I don't know that I want to do this because it's not fun. Well, maybe you've made an idol of whatever that is you're doing, because you're not doing it for God's glory. You're doing it because it's fun, or because you get some kind of recognition for it. You've made an idol out of that thing, that the worship team in my instance. I've made an idol out of the act of leading people in worship. because I did it for the pleasure, I did it for the fun, I did it for those things, and not simply to glorify God. And sometimes it's not fun. Like, God doesn't say that everything you're going to do for me is fun. Like, that's just not how it works.
Yeah. Looking back at this this writing from Calvin, and he's talking about the children of Israel. You know, when Moses had gone up to the mountain and he was receiving the 10 Commandments, and they were like, "Where is he gone?" And what was it? What was that word that you? I think that was a yeah.
Yeah, we
Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we wet not what is become of him. I think that's a King James word. We wet not.
We wet not.
We don't know what's become of him. But it says they knew indeed that there was a God whose mighty power that they had experienced in so many miracles, but they had no confidence of his being near to them. If they did not with their eyes behold this visual symbol of his presence as an attestation of his actual government. So it goes on, it says, they desired therefore to be assured by the image which went before them that they were journeying under divine guidance. And daily experience shows that the flesh is always restless until it has obtained some figment like itself, with which it may vainly solace itself as a representation of God. In other words, we've got to make God more like us. The only way we know that God is with us is the flesh desires to make God more like us. In consequence of this blind passion men have, almost in all ages since the world began, set up signs on which they imagine that God was visibly depicted to their eyes. Any other thoughts on that?
I don't think so. There's a lot in there.
There really is. Maybe we'll cut and paste this into the post so you guys can chew on that afterwards, after the live stream's over. I would probably just sum it up by saying, what visible expressions have you limited God to? It's God work. It's only God working. I know that it's God working if it looks like this. It's only God working if I know that it works like this, or it looks like this.
It makes me feel like this,
or it makes me feel
gives me this
way.
experience.
Yeah. What are the things where you and I think this, and this may be another discussion since we're out of time, but I think this is many times why people say, I'm just not sure that I hear the voice of God, because they've so limited the voice of God to 3 channels instead of, the multi-level, multi-dimensional God that he really is. How do I know that it's God speaking? My default answer usually is, wow, you may not know because you've never heard him speak. Once you've heard him speak, you know that it's God speaking. I mean, you just know. So yeah, if you have any questions or comments that come to mind in relation to that, post them in the comments. It's a great observation, JC. I'm learning that it's only God working when I'm the most uncomfortable. Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's usually the case.
Yeah. I would say this, though. I don't know that it's God that makes you uncomfortable. I think it's that God's exposing more of himself to you, and that makes you uncomfortable.
So now we're back to exposing.
Yeah. And on that note, I hope you all have had a great lunch and learn today. Feel free to post your comments and your questions in the comments, and we'll be back at you tomorrow at 12:30, Thursday, April 30th. Can you believe 4 months of 2020 have almost all gone by? That's crazy. Crazy. All right.
I would have to have like an exit song.
Yeah, we need an exit song or a sign off.
Yeah.
Have you guys noticed? have done. I started a stupid sign off, and I'm forcing myself not to do it anymore. But remember, the first several live streams, I was blowing a kiss. Mwah. Yeah, we're not doing that one anymore. Anyway, we'll talk to y'all later. Have a great day.